This is something that happened to me a few years ago, but I've never really shared it with anyone. It was a Saturday night, and I was working my usual shift as a driver for a local taxi service. The nights were usually pretty predictable, just a few bar-hopping crowds, people heading home from parties, and the usual quiet couple. It was routine, peaceful, nothing more than a way to make a little extra money. Around 11:30 one night, a ride request popped up on my phone. The pickup location was in a remote industrial area on the outskirts of town. It wasn't the usual spot where I'd expect a request, but I didn't think much of it. People often had strange and unusual destinations. I accepted the ride and followed the GPS, my car navigating through increasingly deserted streets until I eventually found the right location. The area was desolate, filled with old, abandoned warehouses and overgrown parking spaces. The only light came from a dim street lamp about 100 meters away. I pulled up to my destination, and a sinking feeling rose in my gut. I tried to shake it off. After all, it was probably just someone working late, or maybe someone who had taken a wrong turn. I waited a few minutes, but no one showed up. I sent a message through the app letting the rider know I had arrived, but still no response. I was about to cancel the ride and drive off when I suddenly saw a man emerge from the shadows. He moved slowly, almost reluctantly, towards the car. I remember the man well. He was wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled low over his face. It made it very hard to see any of his features. He kept his hands in his pockets and never made eye contact as he opened the door and slid into the back seat. Something about him made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he moved, or the way he kept his head down as if he didn't want to be seen. He didn't say a word when he got in, just handed me a crumpled piece of paper with an address hastily scrawled upon it. The destination was only around 20 minutes away. I started driving, and the man remained silent, just staring out of the window, his face hidden in the shadows of his hood. I tried to engage him in conversation, just to break the atmosphere, the usual small talk, but he only gave grunts or a single-word answer. About 10 minutes later, as we were driving through a deserted stretch of road, he suddenly spoke. His voice was low and flat.
Do you ever think about how quickly things can go wrong? How one small decision can change everything?
I felt a chill creep up my spine. It was an odd thing to say out of the blue, but I didn't want to seem spooked, so I just shrugged it off and told him life's unpredictable like that. He nodded slowly, still not looking at me. Then he responded with something equally unnerving.
Do you ever wonder how many people have those moments and don't even realize it? How close they come to something terrible.
There was something in his tone that made me grip the steering wheel a little bit tighter, so I tried my hardest to steer the conversation somewhere else. He didn't respond after that. He just kept staring out of the window. I watched him in the rearview mirror, but his face was still obscured by that darn hood. We drove in silence for a few more minutes. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle as we hit a bump in the road. As we approached the destination, he finally spoke again. His voice was lower than before.
Do you believe in second chances?
I hesitated, unsure of what he meant, but agreed that Surely everyone deserves a second chance. He finally turned his head to look at me, and for the first time I caught a glimpse of his cold, dark, empty eyes.
No. Not everyone.
The words sent a shiver down my spine. We pulled up to the address he had given. It was a quiet, suburban street, lined with neat, well-kept houses. It was tidy, inviting, unlike anything I would have assumed of this guy. Something felt off. There were no lights on in the house that we had stopped in front of. No signs of family or friends. There was no signs of life at all. The man didn't get out right away. He just sat there, staring at the house, his face an emotionless mask. I was about to ask if everything was okay when he suddenly leaned forward. His voice was almost a whisper.
Thanks. You've been a big help.
I forced a smile, nodding, eager for him to leave. He slowly opened the door and stepped out, but before he closed it, he leaned in one last time.
You should probably take a different route home. Just a friendly suggestion.
He shut the door before I could respond, and I watched as he walked up to the house, disappearing into the shadows. I didn't wait around. I sped off, my heart racing, trying to make sense of the unsettling encounter. As I drove away, I kept an eye on the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there in the middle of the street, watching me. But he never was. I took his advice, as unnerving as it was, and took a different route home, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts all the way. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to check the news, half hoping I wouldn't find anything. But there it was, on every single channel. The details were gruesome. Couple found murdered in their home, the crime scene described as a bloodbath, and the address listed was the same one I had dropped the man off just last night. The police were asking for any information about a possible suspect. A man in his late 30s to early 40s, last seen wearing a dark hoodie. When they showed the blurry footage from the neighbor's backyard camera, I felt my stomach crawl. I knew it was him, the man I had driven just last night, the one who had sat in my car and spoken so strangely about how things can change in an instant. I reported what I knew to the police, but they didn't seem optimistic. The man had left no trace, and there were no leads beyond the vague description I could give them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his cold, empty gaze staring back at me. Heard his voice asking about second chances. I knew I had been close, too close, to something truly evil. And the worst part was, I had helped him to get away with it. The police never found the man, and the case gradually faded from headlines. But for me, it has never truly gone away. I don't do the night shifts anymore, but even still, every time I pick up a passenger now, I can't help but wonder who they really are and what they might be hiding.